necessarily know that you've made a big misstep because you haven't spent a lot of time like trying to think about there are things that you think about how it's going to land, right? How you write your test optional policy, how you write your information about your supplement being optional. Like we take a lot of time thinking about how those things are going to land, but some things we whip through, and there's a lot of turnover, there's a lot of changes in leadership. And so sometimes that kind of institutional knowledge gets lost also as you're like passing work down to sort of the next generation of admission officers.
All right, Hillary's back. Hi, Hillary.
Hi, Mark.
We're doing another grinding my gears. We're grinding. We're on the college side, and we're doing one that's not too dissimilar from one we did before. We're back to looking at deferrals, and this time we're talking about how it grinds our gears when a college defers an applicant and they do not share any data about what a student's chances of getting in are. So the student has no idea whether to have hope. What is it that grinds your gears about this, Hillary? And how do you guys handle that?
Yeah, well, this has changed recently. I just think this is a thing that colleges don't think about. It's not that they're trying to be mean or inhumane in their process. It's just one that like you're throwing together all of the decision letters and you're writing the information that you know needs to be there, but you forget to think about that students are wondering what their chance is. For some schools that have a really low admit rate from defer, maybe it's purposeful, right? Because they don't want to discourage students from like sticking with them through the defer process. Because I don't know, is this your sense, Mark, that anytime a student is deferred, there's a next step? Like you have to opt in to the deferral. At most schools, you have to do something to say, yes, I want to continue on. And so they don't want to discourage students from taking that step because if they need them later on, they need the student to have opted into the deferral process. So perhaps that's why some schools don't share it. But we changed this recently in our deferral letters and added that our admit rate from defer is, I can't remember exactly the number, but it's somewhere around 60%. Like if you stick with us and you choose to go from EA, from early action into early decision 2 or regular action, then you have a pretty good shot of being admitted, especially if you follow the very clear instructions that we send you. And so I'm glad we've made that change, but it wasn't a malicious choice to not have that in there to begin with. It was just sort of a like not thinking through sort of from the viewpoint of a student.
I mean, that was kind of grinding my gears. And I know you guys have like educational advisory team and advisory people on your counseling. Because coming from the counseling side, it feels incredibly disconnected for an admission office to not know how that lands with the student, you know? And that's one thing I'm really big on is I wish colleges would beef up however their committees or advisory boards they use to keep the pulse of the student community, because anybody will tell you this is not like Mark Stucker's opinion. Like this is like ubiquitous, right? And so
But we
it's
have to
really
ask the
hard.
right questions. I think one of the challenges is that we don't ask our advisory boards the right questions. And so many advisory boards are really cheerleader building boards more than they are asking for advice. And so the college really has to be thinking about what questions they ask so that they can get the right information from them. And sometimes these kinds of decisions are made really quickly on the college side. And the idea of like trying to pass it through an advisory board feels overwhelming because the person who's writing the letter isn't the same person who manages the advisory board. And like there should be processes at schools where all of us have access to the advisory board email list and we can send something to them at any time, or maybe it's in a group chat or something and getting immediate feedback constantly. But that's not how most advisory boards work, unfortunately.
Yeah. I'd like to see them step up their game and having
Yeah,
more communication, because I think it just makes their
same.
job easier if they can be in
Yes.
touch. You know, it makes their job easier. You probably remember. Do you remember when I had Carmen Chavez on the podcast? She's a student.
Yeah.
She's a student.
At
I
University of
interviewed her.
Miami?
She's from Miami, but she went to Duke.
Okay, yes, I do
So
remember her.
yes, she's from Miami. So I first interviewed her when she was in high school, and then I interviewed her after she graduated from Duke. And she shared this when I interviewed her in high school. So when she applied early decision to Duke, and she was deferred. And Duke said right in the letter that our acceptances from deferrals mirrors our regular decision admit rate, which at the time was between 5 to 10%.
Wow.
So she called me and said, "That's it. I'm not getting in. I'm moving on. I'm done with Duke." And so she completely moved off of it. She got in Northwestern and regular, which she kind of was excited about, and some other schools. And then she pleasantly was surprised to get into Duke. And for those of you who don't know, if you are deferred early decision and then you get in, it's no longer binding. So now she had a choice. She didn't have to go. But I'm shouting them out because it was so helpful for them to share that information and to mentally prepare her.
Mhm.
And I'm really shouting them out because, as you said, some schools may not do that because they don't want to discourage applicant and make it harder to yield. So when you have a lower acceptance rate, in some ways, you almost give you more credit that you're divulging that because, that is a time when someone could mentally move on, as Carmen did mentally move on. She mentally moved on from having any expectation she would get in.
Yeah.
And it was
But
actually very healthy for her. It was
I
very
would
healthy
think
for her
that
to do that.
also works in
Mhm.
Duke's favor in some ways because the students who are sticking with you through defer are the ones who really want to come there. And so you can sort of count on having a higher yield rate because you've told them, look, your chances of getting in are not any better from defer than they are from early decision.
And it
Or,
certainly can add to the honor of being one of the chosen ones too.
yeah.
That can
Yeah,
help you.
for sure.
Wow, I was one of the 5 to 10% that got the golden ticket, you know? But I just wish schools would do this. It's now, in fairness, I called out MIT before because they defer typically about 70%, 60 to 70% every year. And we know that they're not taking very, very many of those kids. But there are years that they have said that their deferral to admit rate is about 2%. So I do appreciate them for doing that. It's when it's really low and they don't tell you, because if somebody really likes a school and they get deferred, they tend not to lose hope, especially these high achievers and their parents. They're kind of used to being able to sort of get their way and make things happen. Parents are oftentimes powerful places and they're used to running companies and being in charge, and they're not used to having a lot of people say no to them. And they just always believe. Maybe some of it is their naive optimism, some of it is their ambition, some of it is their entitlements. It's some toxic brew of all of it, maybe, but their mindset is, I gotta believe there's a way. Which button do I have to push? Because I gotta believe, I know we can make this happen. I just have to figure out what the formula is so I can execute it. Almost like it's a math equation.
Yeah.
And that they tend to think that way. And in many cases, that's completely out of their control. It's dependent on how well the school yields with their acceptances and who they yield and whether you're in need for them or not in need. Like, so much is out of your control. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. We covered it all.
Yeah, it feels good knowing there's someone else there that empathizes with me.
Yes,
These are the things that aggravate
absolutely.
me at times. Yeah. And I know so many times that people do mean well and they just don't know how things land. And I've said this to you before. I love talking with people and they leave admissions and they we call it going to the other side of the desk. And then I ask them, like, what are the things you didn't know and then a lot of times they just hang their head because they're really embarrassed by
Yeah.
things that they just very innocently
I
did,
just yeah,
very
and,
well
like,
intentioned, and had
things
no
move
idea.
quickly, and sometimes you're not
Mhm.
even thinking about it because things just move quickly and you have to get stuff done, and you don't necessarily know that you've made a big misstep because you haven't spent a lot of time, like, trying to think about how s you there are things that you think about how it's gonna land, right? How you write your test optional policy, how you write your information about your supplement being optional, like, we take a lot of time thinking about how those things are gonna land, but some things we whip through, and there's a lot of turnover, there's a lot of changes in leadership. And so sometimes that kind of institutional knowledge gets lost also as you're like passing work down to sort of the next generation of admission officers.
But I also think there's just not enough communication with the other side of the desk. Like,
Yeah.
I once had a very, very experienced admission officer over lunch say to me, we've been encouraging our students when they get in to blast it all over social media. And we're starting to wonder, maybe that's not that great of a thing. What do you think? Well, any counselor would be like, no, don't do that. You're
Yeah.
inflicting pain on all the other people that are in despair with with these announcements. And like, this person very well intentioned and they listen to me and they're like, you're making a lot of good points. But like, I would argue that a school wouldn't even do something like that if they were having communication with how that lands on the other side. Not to say you're always going to get it right, but I just think there's an absence of communication to an important component of how this stuff lands in the students, in the
Yeah.
students' lap that
And the
doesn't
folks
happen
working
as
in
much as I
leadership
feel. Mhm.
Yeah, and the folks working in leadership and admission have certainly built enough relationships over the years with
Sure.
counselors on the other side of the desk because lots of times they were traveling internationally together as admission officers or they were standing
Yeah.
next to each other at fairs before their counterparts moved to the other side of the desk. So it should be as easy as like picking up your phone and texting a group chat and asking how is this going to land. I just think sometimes there's a disconnect between where the work is happening and the people who are thinking to ask counselors for advice.
Yeah, and sometimes these decisions are made at a level where people are no longer as student facing
Yeah.
as the people on the front lines
Or
of the
where
battle
the
too.
or where the institutional priorities have become the number one thing that they are thinking about, and they're not thinking as much about the student experience because they might be in a tight place at the institution.
So give
And
an example of that, Harold. I think that somebody may not be following that. Can give an example of how the institutional priorities
yeah, I
could get
think
in the way of
about,
something being
like,
student
pushing
sensitive.
kids into ED and
Sure.
offering incentives for a student to sign up for ED, right? And I think most counselors who I talk to would say that that's not very student centered, that they would rather students have more options than jumping into ED. But on the college side, there are administrators who think like this is how we are going to make our class, and it's the only way we're going to make our class. So we're going to have to push ED through whatever incentive structure we have to push ED. And I think
I'm going to give an
colleges,
example of that. I'm
yeah,
going to
go
give an
ahead.
example. So this is hot off the press. A student I worked with this year, in fact, a student who was admitted to your school, but a student who was admitted this year, and and it was offensive to her. So she talked to me about it in the counseling room, but she got a flyer that said, "Why ED may be the best decision you ever make." Like that was the flyer. I mean, this is a family that knew that they needed to compare financial aid offers. So that took ED off the table right away just for that reason alone. So that really, really didn't land well with that student. Later, I had a chance to spend, some significant time with the VP of enrollment at that particular school, and the person shared with me how people are just not EDing us like they used to. Like they're just not, and we just have to come to the realization that we just don't have the stature in the marketplace to get these number of EDs like we were hoping we can, and we just don't. And that's so there you see both sides of it right there. That's
Mhm.
the exact example of what you're talking about in that exact instance, right? The school
Well,
was feeling
and then I think it's
pressure,
on the college to innovate away from ED, right? Like if ED is
and
not
and the,
working anymore.
and they are by the way. I don't mention the name, but they are because
Yeah.
it's not working, upping the merit scholarships and doing some other creative things. So yeah, so they did realize that it's not working for us anymore. We can't get the numbers that we need off ED, no matter how much we try to convince people. We're just not there in the marketplace to do that, and so.
But that's hard because
But
then you're also sort of pushing back against the trends in admission where everyone else is pushing harder on ED and you're trying to figure out ways to innovate and to do things differently. And that's a hard sell when you have to sell that up to the cabinet and the president and the board of trustees and all the people who are counting on you to bring in the class and pay the bills. I think it takes a lot of courage. It takes an institution that has a lot of trust in their enrollment leaders, and that's I think pretty rare in higher ed.
And friends, 99% of you are probably following this, but in case, you're not, Hillary and I have these high level conversations. We're coming over to YouTube and it's a different forum and a different medium and a different audience. And I don't want to assume anything. So ED is just short for early decision. Early decision is a program where you have an early deadline, typically November 1st, extremely common. And you're making a binding decision if you get in, meaning you have to go. It's not legally binding, but you could say it's morally binding. Student has to sign, parent has to sign, counselor has to sign, and colleges take into effect that you're committing. And oftentimes it can be a gentler admission rate because that helps the college significantly. And so that's what we're talking about when we throw ED around. I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page and trying to uh, trying to speak is tough. We're speaking to people who are doing counseling for 45 years and immigrant families that have been here 2 weeks. Yep, all good. Thanks, Hillary.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. What?
Listeners, if you want more of this content, then click that bell notification. And as soon as we drop a new video, you'll get it right into your box. We'd also love it if you'd share it and leave a comment and subscribe because we're going to be doing these. We're going to have 4 or 5 of these videos for you a week. So if you like what you saw here, there'll be a lot more. Hillary will be back. We have about 12 people on our co-host team. So you'll see different people all together. We have over 250 years experience either on the counseling or admissions side. So hopefully we're helpful. Thanks, Hillary. See you next time.
Thanks, Mark. See you later.